Okay. Good morning and welcome to the April 26th, 2023 Board of Directors meeting. And thank you for being on the line, if you are. So we're going to start by a Pledge of Allegiance.
Who's ahead of the game?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I have to tell you a confession. So, my first board meeting, I was so used to Chris starting the Pledge of Allegiance for 2 straight years that I just stood there waiting. Finally, Chris started, and then I just go. So anyway, roll call, please.
Yes. Division 1.
Here.
Division 2.
Here.
Division 3.
Here.
Division 4.
Here.
Division 5.
Here.
And public comment for items not on the agenda. Seeing none, we will move on to special orders, the investment portfolio review, and Jennifer will start us off.
I am going to turn it over to Monique because she is the expert and can definitely speak about it better than me. Monique, you want to take it away?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start by actually addressing some questions that were asked during the last board meeting where my colleague Allison County spoke and gave this presentation. And we have 3 questions to address, and I'll go through them all each individually and remind the group what those questions were. The first question was if we purchased Treasury inflation protection securities for accounts like the districts. And the answer is that we can buy Treasury inflation protection securities, but we typically don't. We find essentially that the impact of inflation is felt deepest on longer term assets and liabilities. And, thinking about assets, for example, beyond 5 years. Some of our accounts are sinking funds or that are sinking funds for payments that are due, for example, in 50 years, absolutely have them as a key factor in the portfolio. But we don't use them that frequently based on the nature of the investment themselves. For example, Treasury inflation protection securities carry very low coupons and yields in the marketplace. For example, a 5-year TIP bond currently offers a yield of 1.18%. And you compare that to a 5-year US Treasury note that has a yield closer to 3.2 to 3.4%. So the difference between the two is expected to be that inflation component over the coming 5 years. And if inflation doesn't come through hotter than expected, you essentially miss out as an investor. So the best time to buy TIPS is when inflation is calm and yields are similar. So that is why we don't purchase Treasury inflation protection securities for accounts like the districts. The next question we were asked to address was essentially if we had to liquidate all of the assets in the portfolio and repurchase to give the portfolio the optimal structure that we would consider in the marketplace, what would that look like, and would we recommend such an approach? And essentially what our sort of target structure is for this type of portfolio is very diversified by sector. So, our goal essentially is to have the portfolio be about 25% federal agencies, with only about 5% being in callable bonds. And I'll go through your portfolio structure, which is much higher than that. We would want around a 45% allocation to US Treasury securities, which is typical in our portfolios. We really believe in having a very high base of Treasury securities in a portfolio. It provides you with good liquidity, good ability to restructure the portfolio as necessary, and also just having a high quality asset class. We also would look to have about 20% of the portfolio in corporate instruments, 5% in asset-backed securities, and 5% in negotiable or certificates of deposit. We actually don't believe that liquidating the security in the current market is the best strategy. And the reason for that is that the effective duration of your portfolio is actually fairly low. So we believe that we'll have time to restructure the portfolio in a very prudent way. And do it slowly over time. So we believe that the best course of action is the one we're currently taking with the portfolio. And that has essentially been to let the commercial paper mature in the portfolio and reinvest in commercial paper. And that has been allowing us to pick up very high yields given the way the market is structured, and allow the securities that are currently in longer dated assets to roll down. The bulk of the assets in the portfolio are not pieces we would buy if we had new cash. Essentially, we wouldn't necessarily purchase what we have in the portfolio, but we believe it doesn't make sense to sell them because they act similarly to the pieces we would be buying, only at higher yields. So we don't think it makes sense to sell a deeply discounted callable security maturing in 2025, only to then repurchase a treasury bond to the same date at a lower yield. The treasury isn't callable and has more duration certainty and liquidity, but holding the callable piece that you own should work out fine in the next 12 to 18 months. And at that time, we may view it differently as the interest rate curve has time to settle a little bit. I will note that your portfolio has been performing really well relative to the benchmark and the index, because it's drifted down to be essentially about 95% of the index. I'll talk about some of that when we get through performance. But essentially, long story short on our restructuring is that, we believe that the current strategy that we're taking is serving the district well. And although the assets in the portfolio are not necessarily assets we will buy or we would buy today, they are still doing the job we need them to do in the portfolio. And then lastly, the last question we had from this group during the last meeting was, are there any pitfalls that we would look to avoid, like the portfolio had been managed in prior iterations? And I think the main issue that we see is that there was not enough diversity in the portfolio. There was too many callable agencies in the portfolio. We are working through that diversification. And as I said, our plan to diversify the portfolio over time will and has been working out. So we're comfortable staying the course there. And those are the three questions we had from the board from the last meeting. If there are no follow-up questions on those questions, I will jump into our presentation.
Very helpful, Monica.
Yeah.
Monique. Sorry. Very established credibility when you
Right?
Thank you for doing such a great job.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, let's jump into the presentation, and I will keep my comments brief in the interest of time, but still thorough. So I'm going to share some materials on the screen, and I believe you also have this report in your packet as well. Okay, well, the market environment has been characterized by a few major surprises this past quarter. One, lingering inflation continues to be well above the Fed's long-term inflation target. We have seen the labor market show the first signs of moderation. And what's interesting about the labor market is, in California, you've been hearing about a lot of tech layoffs and things like that. I think that labor market angst is starting to bleed into other sectors in the economy. So that's just a note there. And then, this quarter, we had a lot of additional economic uncertainty following the surprise failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. Now, the Fed policy tightening cycle may be nearly complete. And as a reminder, that tightening cycle, what we mean by tightening is the Fed raising interest rates in the short end of the curve, that federal funds target rate. The most recent statement from the Fed noted that some additional firming may be appropriate, but the need for more rate hikes has become less clear. And so the Fed raised their target rate by about 1/4 percentage point in the first quarter. We're expecting another rate increase from the Fed this year, and that may be it for a while. Now, what's interesting is that the market and the Fed are not aligned in what the expectations are. The Fed has, acknowledged the bank failures, acknowledged some of the stress in the financial markets as a result of their actions, but really have stated very clearly that they do not expect to change course. Their economic projections were little changed from the end of the calendar year. And they've maintained that they will keep rates elevated for some time. And this is very different than what the market expects, which is for the Fed to reduce rates in the second half of this year. So I find it very interesting, just anecdotally, that the Fed is trying to be very clear about the fact that they will be raising rates and they expect rates to stay the same through the year end, but the market is very diligent on their view that the Fed is going to cut rates mid-year. And so you'll see the yield curve is sort of reflecting the market view, not necessarily the Fed view. Bond markets, because of everything that happened this quarter, saw unprecedented volatility in March. We saw a classic flight to quality with the 2-year Treasury yield falling very sharply. It fell from 5.07% at the beginning of March to just under 4% on March 17th. The yield curve is inverted. So yield on the shorter end of the curve, think to yourselves liquidity products, commercial paper, which we're buying a lot of, and other short-term instruments providing much higher yields than you see in the longer end of the yield curve. And that inversion is at the deepest level it's been in over 40 years. Now, credit yield spreads did widen, and credit yield spreads are the additional income you receive from purchasing credit bonds like corporate notes, et cetera, versus treasuries. And those widened over the quarters, especially on banks. And a lot of that had to do with the uncertainty in the financial markets because of those bank collapse. But they were not as high as levels seen during the global financial crisis. And that's appropriate because, the banking issue is really isolated to a few banks, which had their deposit and asset schedules off center. Now, go ahead.
A question from
Yes.
Director Jones.
Yeah. Thank you, Monique. So this morning, a lot of people, some economists think the Fed has kind of run out of ammo, that they have really no more wiggle room to affect anything. So they look, even the 25 basis points increase for next week is in doubt because of First Republic Bank. There isn't a stress test for these banks that have long-term bonds, and they're trying to make up on the short term. The interest rates have stretched so far, you're talking about the how it's diverted. I guess my take on all this is that a lot more banks are in stress than they're letting out. It's just not a few. And if they really started looking at it, the Fed just can't do any more. They can raise it to, 25 more basis points, and then they're not going to do anything. They haven't done the job. They have not gotten inflation under control because they can't. There's nothing left for them to do.
Yeah,
so we're going to be living. Huh?
Yeah, I think as far as the Fed is concerned with regard to the banking industry, I feel as though the Fed has given fairly strong indications that they believe that issue is handled, despite the fact that, investors are concerned about banks at large. The Fed's position has been, that the banking industry has sort of closed ranks and is supporting that problem. So with First Republic Bank in particular, you saw multiple large banks provide First Republic Bank with additional liquidity. They have additional lending sources to access liquidity over and above that amount should they need. And the other banks are following suit with other lending facilities. The Fed's position has been We've done what we could, and we're going to continue the course despite the angst in the banking sector, which is a very unique position because I think at the time when we were sort of embroiled in the, will they, won't they of it all, there was some sense that maybe the Fed would pull back on their tightening cycle. And the Fed has essentially doubled down and said that they are not going to do so. And inflation, while not coming down as much as we would like, the pace of inflation has certainly slowed, and the Fed sees that as a positive thing. In reality, in order for this to work well, the Fed and some economists would wanted to have seen some more slowdown in the employment environment that hasn't happened to the pace that they would like. This may seem counterintuitive, but they were actually hoping to see unemployment go much higher, because that would indicate that, there is less investment, there is less growth, there is less demand for workers. And that's what you really want to see when you're trying to put the brakes on inflation. So, I believe the Fed is sincere when they say they want to keep rates elevated for a while to continue to put that pressure on the market, to cause that angst, because that's really what it's going to take for inflation to slow at the rate that I think we would all like.
Well, I don't think I disagree with you. I haven't disagreed.
Yeah.
No, because I think we're gonna see a couple more months where inflation will rise back up a little bit because of the core, and I think we're gonna see a few more banks starting to get stressed. But I feel comfortable. Thank you I think you have our back, and you're doing a great job for us. So thank you.
Great, you're welcome.
Director Bierwagen also has a question.
Hi, Monique. As we go on this next page, I believe that Rich answered my question about a BPS basis point. And how are those numbers determined? I get the general idea. How are they? I've not heard this term before. How are they? Who comes up with those numbers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a basis point is if you take 1%, 1.00%, a basis point is, the penny in that number. So it breaks that 1 percentage point into its parts. So looking at the beginning of January, you see that negative 21 basis points. That means that the 2-year Treasury yield fell by 0.21%. So it declined. So if you had a 1%, if the 2-year was 1%, it would have been 0.79% on January 6th. And the changes in these numbers, this graphic is meant to show you how much the 2-year Treasury fluctuated during the month. And you can see, depending on any bit of news that came out, the 2-year went down 21 basis points, it went down 12, then it was up 18, then it was up 18 again, then it was down 30, then it was down 57. And this is just to show you how much investors are reacting to changes in the news. And so what changes these numbers, where these changes come from, is the buying and selling activity on the 2-year Treasury bond. So we'll say to you often in these presentations that the market value of your portfolio will fluctuate. And as interest rates go down, market values go up. And as interest rates go up, market values go down. And what that means is, looking at this sort of decline, when interest rates declined, we saw higher prices for 2-year Treasury bonds. When interest rates are up, we see lower prices for 2-year Treasury bonds. And so this is just an indication of how the market is reacting to news. And, typically the bond market is not this volatile. It's not this up and down. You would see very small changes quarter over quarter for yields in the market, and that just has not been the case. I'm looking at this exhibit in a different way. We show the daily change of the 2-year Treasury yield over time. And this is a much more intuitive graphic. So instead of looking at it by basis point overall change, you could just see where the yield came down at the beginning of the quarter, then was all the way back up during the quarter, and then essentially fell off a cliff during the banking news. And so if we look at that in terms of volatility, which is what we show here on the right, it just basically shows that that volatility was about the same or a little bit higher than it was during the COVID pandemic, when the global market was panicking. Other things that I did want to highlight is corporate yield spreads. Now, again, corporate yield spreads are also the additional yield that you receive for purchasing corporate bonds. And this chart is actually in basis points. So this 20 is 20 basis points over a similar maturity treasury, and this is 40 basis points. So again, that would be 0.20% or 0.40%. Once you get up to 100, you can read this as 1%, and then this as 2%. So up here, you're getting 2% over a treasury. And what we want to highlight here is that at the end of the month, the additional yield you receive for purchasing a financial corporate bond or a corporate bond issued by a financial corporation, you've got so much additional yield. And why is that? Those bonds became cheaper because folks were less interested in buying them. And so you had to provide additional income to make those bonds attractive, given the risk that was seen in that sector during that time period. On the right, we show the difference between financial and industrial corporate yield spreads. And so again, this axis is in basis points. And this just shows you that, you know, for a while, you look over time, you're getting about a little bit more yield for financials than you were for industrials, but it peaks. So even though we saw a bit of widening, it certainly was not as wide as, again, during that liquidity crisis of 2007, 2008. So we wanted to highlight then, just to reiterate that, you know, the market is viewing the financial crisis as really an isolated incident amongst a couple of banks. And I do agree that banks are doing a little bit of a deeper dive into their risk assessment, into the management of their balance sheets in light of the Silicon Valley and Signature bank failures. But we're expecting that those banks, if they do have issues, are going to be working really swiftly to clean those up, because the risk management framework for banks is certainly a topic that's getting a lot of focus these days. So let's talk about, go ahead, question.
How do they clean it up? They're
How do
holding long-term, they're holding long-term bonds at low interest, and yet they're in a higher interest rate market. How do they clean it up?
Yeah, so that's a good question.
Do it.
Yeah, banks have a number of tools at their disposal. One way that they're working to address the issue is by tightening their lending standards. And the reason this is important is, you know, the basic business model of banks is that they take in deposits, you know, from you, from me as an individual consumer, from other places, and then they loan those portfolios out. By tightening their lending standard, it essentially shrinks the amount of those deposits that are available for lending. And that way they're able to sort of build up their asset base, have more liquidity on their balance sheets, so that, you know, if they get a desire for withdrawal, and this is what is really important in terms of the banking issues that we saw this quarter, it's the demand for withdrawal of those deposits. You know, banks are trying to control for scenarios in which, you know, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40% of their depositors ask for that cash back on any given day. So by tightening their lending standards, they assure that they have more of those cash on deposits. Other ways they can do that also is by taking a look at their deposit bases, who have deposits in excess of the FDIC insurance, talking to those customers perhaps about buying other products at the bank, whether that be fixed income investment portfolios to try to spread that risk. The more they can make their depositors comfortable that holding those assets in the bank is a safe investment, the better it is for the bank. So you may see banks start to offer investment products for their clients to get that money again off the balance sheet into different products at the bank to spread some of that risk around. And that's what we're seeing. You're also seeing risk management departments at banks basically lower the scenario between how much of the assets can be invested longer term, the duration of those portfolios at the banks to come down a little bit. So all of those tools and techniques are being discussed by banks right now to lessen the possibility of depositors coming to grab their deposits and or the bank being less liquid than it needs to be should it need to raise cash.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Brief comments on the yield. Go ahead. I'm sorry, is there another question? Okay, brief comments on the yield curve. I already mentioned at the start of my presentation that the yield curve was deeply inverted. And I just want to show you or highlight this blue line. You can see that really clearly here. And this is the US Treasury curve. So this doesn't even account for the additional yield available in the credit markets. But you can see here that the highest option on this table is really in the 3-month area. And then it goes down from there, with the 2-year being a 379, the 5-year being a 357. And so you can just see that deep inversion of the yield curve. Index returns for the quarter were positive, which is a nice change of pace versus earlier in the year. So I talked about Treasury projections, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but I really want you to see the difference between the lighter shades on each of these graphs and the darker shades, and the fact that they're basically essentially the same. The Fed at their quarterly meetings does projections on the economy and where they think the economy is going to be over the next few years. And, you know, the banking situation did not change the Fed's view of what they expected. They continue to expect positive growth. They expect the unemployment rate to remain generally unchanged. They expect, importantly here, the Fed funds rate to sort of stay at 5% through the end of the year and not decline until 2024. They do expect inflation to come down a bit, but not down as much as their long-term target. So that's just a reinforcement of their messaging that, you know, they are planning to stay the course. We should expect higher rates through the end of the year, and we should not expect rates to decline until 2024. That is the message that the Fed is trying over and over again to reinforce in the market. We are paying very close attention to speeches by Fed governors, just trying to make sure that if the Fed does change this viewpoint, we're aware of that and taking that into account. I already told you that the market doesn't believe them, and this is a great chart to show that. The market does not believe that the Fed is going to stay that course, so that's actually what's reflected in the rates right now. This chart shows the implied Fed funds rate, which is the solid blue line. And then we have what the Fed is projecting that rate to be in the black. And so again, much higher than the market. And so we'll see if the market comes to believe the Fed. And if they do, then we might see yields on 2-year bonds rise up a bit. All right, with that said, I'm going to turn to the account summary. I just want to make sure there are no more questions about the market. Okay, here.
Real quick one. How does anybody factor in geopolitical impacts?
Oh, that's a good question. Geopolitical impacts, you really see the most with yield on longer term treasury bonds. Treasuries are a great investment that's typically used when you want to get like a safe investment in your portfolio. And so you'll see the 2-year respond, or I'm sorry, treasury bonds in general respond to any geopolitical risks. I hate to say that the market has sort of gotten used to all of the turmoil globally, all of the to be frank, dysfunction in American politics as it relates to the debt ceiling. The market right now is still confident that the U.S. is going to pay its debt. And so we've seen that reflected. I have not seen a shift in that belief from the market. And again, when there are geopolitical risks, you see a lot of volatility in treasury bonds. But a lot of the things that have been going on politically, we had a market shock about those a lot last year, and things so far has come down as unfortunately we've all sort of gotten used to the level of risk in the markets.
Good answer.
Okay, let's dive into the market summary. This is a consolidated view of the portfolio. And I told you I would sort of highlight your sector allocation. So about 87% of the portfolio is in federal agencies. We're waiting for a lot of these federal agencies to move down the maturity curve, upon which we'll be reinvesting them in different sectors, as I talked about earlier. 9% of the portfolio is in commercial paper, 3% is in corporate notes, and then we also have that CD portfolio that we're also reinvesting those proceeds. Issuer diversification here across the board. You can see for your overall portfolio, Federal Farm Credit, Federal Home Loan Bank, and Freddie Mac securities, a number of CDs in the portfolio, and the commercial paper that we've been purchasing. Highlighting the specific portfolio that we're managing for the district, it takes out that CD portfolio, which we're tracking separate. I want to highlight just a few things for you here. The duration distribution of the portfolio is very different from the maturity distribution. The maturity distribution I showed a few pages ago was the stated final maturity on the portfolio assets. And so your stated final maturity on a lot of these callable bonds is a little bit longer, but your duration is very short at 1.13 years. And duration takes into account the probable cash flows in the portfolio. So this essentially assumes that some of those callable bonds may be called, in which case we may have access to those proceeds earlier than their stated maturity. And so we're watching that, and the goal is to be able to reinvest those securities when they do mature in the asset classes that we talked about. Again, treasury securities, more corporate notes, more of a defined sector allocation. The net activity, we've shared with you that we're focusing on commercial paper purchases for the investments. The reason for that are fairly simple. Commercial paper is providing really attractive income, and it's a great place to park funds, take advantage of that higher income while we can, while we essentially look for the rest of the securities to come in line or look for opportunities to sell those securities. Commercial paper yields have been eclipsing 5% for most of the quarter. And so we're looking at that. There is a large piece of the portfolio that's coming due on May 11th. So that's something that we're targeting for reinvestment in some of those sectors that we talked about. Performance this quarter has been great. Again, glad to be back in positive return territory. We have the portfolio having a return of 1.89% versus 1.82%. Some of that has to do, you'll see the drastic change in return from the prior quarter to this quarter. A lot of that has to do with how the portfolio's duration has shifted. So we went from a position of 130% of benchmark duration to about 95% of benchmark duration. So we're much more in line with the benchmark. And that's why we feel a bit better about where we are today. And so we'll continue to manage the portfolio as we have done, looking for those opportunities, but we're really happy with the way this has been trending. Just taking market value changes off the table, you can see the earnings have been trending positive, a bit higher, and we expect that as we continue to invest in higher yielding securities than have been available before. This is my last formal slide. I will stop sharing and go back for any additional questions the board may have.
Monique, does your organization, is that the basis point fee?
Yes, we do charge a fee in basis points. Our fee for the quarter was about 2 basis points, and I believe you'll find it averages about 8 basis points for the year.
Okay, so Director Heck, the question?
Hi, Monique. Thank you for this. I also feel great about your performance of your agency and you in particular, and thank you. But I do have a question on page 21 of our presentation, where it shows sort of like it runs up the total, ends up the total values, and it says the managed account subtotal and securities subtotal is $96,885,000, and but then across the grid there, it shows the market value is 89. So is it true that that is a statement as if we sold the whole portfolio today, we would, because of the decline in market value, that it would only be an $89 million thing versus the 96 that you have there? So if you could explain a bit about why those two are different.
Yep, sure. So that is correct. And the 90s, I'm going to actually share my screen so we can all look at the numbers together. Give me just
it's like an $8 million swing.
Yep.
And
can you all see this?
I'm just curious to what that is. Yeah.
So this par value is not the value you should be looking at for the value that either the district paid for the security or the value that you would receive. Par value simply is a note to say how many lots of a security. So just to compare that to something, if you had, for example, shares of stock, it would be like the same thing. I have X shares of a security. That's the way par value is used. The amount that the district paid for the securities is this 96.7 figure. And that's the original cost, so dollar paid for the investments. The amortized cost is more of your book value, and it's really closer to the reflective value of the assets to the district at the time. So to compare the amount that you would lose, I would subtract this 89,158 number from this 96.7 number. And that is reflective of market value changes in the portfolio over time. Another way to look at that is that the yield at cost on your portfolio, you can see this is this 1.19% figure. And the market yield, if I had to purchase all of the securities in the district's portfolio on March 31st, the yield that I would expect to receive is closer to a 4.37. And so by buying the portfolio at a discount, this 89,158, that's how I get this portfolio that, has a yield of 1.19 to a yield of 4.37.
I don't understand the 4.37. Can you?
Yep.
Sorry.
So
I don't see it on this chart, and so then I can't.
Yep. That is not reflected on the chart. let me go back. I'm gonna shortcut a moment here to this page. That is this yield at market. So this is a figure that you'd actually see on the monthly statement. Sorry, let me make this easier to see. That you actually see on your monthly statement for March. And the reason this yield at market is higher is I'm going to go back to the holdings I'm going to pick on an example in the portfolio. Here we go. Sorry, forgive me for jumping around a bit. So I'm going to use this Federal Home Loan Bank security as an example. So this security was purchased in 2021. And in 2021, the yield on that federal agency security was 1%. And it was about a 5-year security, right? 2021 through 26. 5-year bonds today are yielding a 3.57. And so yields have simply increased since 2021. So this was a good purchase in 2021, right? We're going to assume that yields were 1% in 2021. So you purchased the bond, but over time, as yields have risen, a buyer of this bond today expects a higher yield on that bond. So the market yield for this bond is higher. And so again, to get an investor to buy it with a 1% coupon, they have to have a discount. And that's why the market value is lower. And so you can see that, 4.5 versus 5 million.
Well, thank you. That explains it perfectly for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Monique. Really a great comfort and assurance to have you and your organization supporting us in this way.
Welcome, my pleasure. We'll continue to work with staff. Please let us know if there are any questions in the meanwhile.
Thanks, Monique.
Yeah.
Going to the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Any public comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none? Take a vote.
Division 1,
Yes.
Division 2,
Yes.
Division 4,
Aye. Excuse me, aye.
Division 5,
Yes.
Division 3.
Aye. Okay, and then we have general orders, the budget amendment for administration ramp repair project for Jennifer.
I am going to handle this one. Mr. Roderick is off today, but this should be an easy one. As the board is aware, we have had a capital project to replace the ramp that connects the parking lot to the building. It has some fairly significant structural deficiencies in it due to its age. This item before the board is to request approval of the construction contract, but also to amend the 2023 annual budget to increase the budget that was allocated to this capital project. The budget amendment will not result in any modification or decrease to the current fund balance because we are also proposing to reduce the approved capital budgets for 2 projects, one of which is the ramp repair project for the other set of ramps that go into the main lobby door. That project will go out to construction more likely next year, so we don't need the allocated funding this year. And as well as the Squirrel Creek, I can never say that very well, Squirrel Creek stipend project, replacement project, is complete, and we didn't use all the budget. So, yeah, exciting,
Well done,
huh?
everybody.
So the item before the board today is to request authorization for amending the 2023 annual budget to increase the funding of the ramp repair project in the amount of $312,000, $647, and then also to amend the 2023 annual budget to reduce funding for Squirrel Creek and the other ramp project, as well as award the construction contract to Mark Wallace Masonry. With that, I can answer any questions.
I just had a question about the expense being funded by Fund 15. So that goes against the water area's capital program, but it seems that, if I'm correct, that when we have improvements to this building, that the water fund is paying for that.
Fund 15 is typically funded by the water fund. I'd have to go pull the original budget to see if there's any other funding. This original project was approved in the capital budget in, I believe it's 2020, 2021, and 2022. It's been on the books for a while, so I'd have to go back to look at the original funding and see if there's any other funding transfers from other funds that came over.
That's just what I wondered, is it co-funded proportionally based on the benefit to administration, so it's partially funded by hydro?
I would have to double check on the original funding proposal. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Could be a holdover.
I think it might be a holdover, I'm just not sure.
Yeah.
And how about this, I'll take a look at it, and if there needs to be any additional funding adjustments, I can bring that back in a mid-year and we can reconcile it.
Other questions?
Congratulations on Squirrel Creek.
Yeah, good job to
Beautiful.
staff. They
Yeah.
did a great job. That was a big project that was integral to being able to still deliver raw water to those
Yes.
folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move to adopt resolution number 2023-19, 2023 Fund 15 Capital Budget Amendment and awards of construction contract for administrative building ramp repair project.
Second. Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll take a vote.
Division 1,
Yes.
Division 2,
Yes.
Division 4,
Yes.
Division 5,
Yes.
Division 3, 5.
Okay, general manager's report.
I just have one quick item. We're not going to do a water supply update. Things have not changed all that much. It's nice when you're almost full that there's not much
Flowing.
cooler to get.
Yeah.
I did want to update the board. Yesterday, we did have a status hearing with the administrative hearing officer related to the state filed water right application that we had filed some years ago related to the Centennial Project. The hearing officer has tentatively projected that she's going to be issuing a order that essentially, because if you'll recall, the main issue before her there's two main issues before her right now. And the first issue is whether they take our petition to obtain part of the state filed water rights on the Bear River to hearing. And then the second issue is related to South Sutter Water District's petition for waiver of priority for that state filed water right application. The question before the hearing officer is, does she take South Sutter's waiver before she takes our application? And it sounds like that she is going to issue a ruling that essentially states that if NID keeps up with our current schedule for the Plant for Water, as well as moving through any environmental related process as it would relate to any proposed project, she would hear them together. But if we do slip or not proceed as we have stated, that she would take the South Sutter Water District item separately. That's all I really had to report. Dustin, you were there too. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, our position is really one of efficiency, what's most cost effective here. And we think that it makes sense to continue to pair the two processes together. And if we have to go to hearing, that it should be done together. Otherwise, you're basically trying to resolve issues in two separate hearings. So,
And one issue affects the other.
correct.
Did she project any kind of, she got strict poker face, I know, but do you have any feeling about where she will land on any of these?
No.
Yeah, I'd be speculating, but I think she's going to keep NID's feet to the fire. You know, we've set a schedule, and she's expecting us to keep it, you know, barring some good reason, like an unforeseen issue needs to be analyzed in the plan for water process. But you know, I'm not aware of any of those issues at this moment. So I would expect that she's going to keep NID's feet to the fire, that we are expected to maintain our schedule, which is our intent. And she'll likely schedule another status conference probably for the August, September time period, for another check-in.
Fair enough.
So it seems reasonable to me.
So,
Yeah, I think so.
so what could derail our plan for water? Not us.
Snowmageddon, power.
Well, you know, we have committed to a very robust public process, and so any derailment will likely be in response to meeting requests from stakeholders for additional analysis. But I also don't believe that the answers we seek as it relates to the state filed water right application don't necessarily need to be dependent upon, you know, completion of the whole plan for water document. We'll have that data earlier.
Yeah, we're gonna have it relatively soon.
Yeah, so the modeling's going along just fine. As the board is aware, we have moved the May plan for water meeting to the Tuesday before the second meeting in the month, just to allow the stakeholders to be able to engage prior to the meeting and give the consultant team a little bit more time. We plan on having our June meeting on track, so I think we're looking pretty good.
Now, the May 10th meeting here conflicts with the planning commission meeting on the mine.
The May 10th regular board meeting?
Yes, it does. The planning commission meeting starts it's an all-day meeting, 9 to 5 or something, and then we'll roll over to the next day if needed.
Well, I think if the board desires or staff comments, I think we can make them after. We can make them after this board meeting is over.
You have to be there pretty early in the morning and to take a number to be able to speak and make comment. Thank you for bringing that up, Rich, because that was a concern for me.
It's up to the board.
Would you want to participate in that?
Yes, absolutely.
I was confused about
Yeah.
what the reason for.
I don't believe we have any super pressing business for the May meeting that kind of hold over. If the board desires to cancel that meeting and push everything, we likely can do that. It really is up to the board. I don't know that it matters to me at this point. I feel confident that I could probably sneak my way into line and get a number.
You could, but I can't. Well, I helped her last time, remember?
I had a lot of people offer to help me.
Yeah, I got.
They usually give us some courtesy.
Really? Good.
Well, they'll provide some courtesy. They know we're another public agency,
Right.
just as we would.
What? Yeah.
The Cs will hurt for Jeff.
Yes, right, they do indeed.
Well, and we can also, how about we have a final discussion related to the scheduling of the May 9th board meeting offline, and I will coordinate with President Hull and Vice President Johansson. Does that work?
Good idea.
Okay, that's great.
So both Ricky and I have been on the Nevada County Planning Commission,
Mm-hmm.
and this is probably the most critical meeting they have ever had.
That's the truth.
And the talking points in response to the EIR, because this morning it came out that
The staff
option
report.
A and B, the staff report, both recommends approving the EIR,
Right.
some with mitigation, some whatever. We need the district's talking points.
Mm-hmm. To be
So that-
presented at that meeting.
Presented that meeting, and personally, we have pretty good relationships with who took our places.
Maybe we should hold this for our individual comments. I don't think this is something on the agenda today.
Yeah, I would feel more comfortable. Why don't you, we can talk offline, and then, I am planning on making comments. I'm fairly confident in our position, so I think it'll be good.
Are they ready?
They're not ready. I was planning on personally making them.
Great.
Great.
Okay, so
That-
director
We need to
update?
allow that.
Are we moving on to director update?
Yeah.
Okay. Ricky, why don't we start with you today?
Thank you. I don't have much to update, as you know, I've been traveling. But just to piggyback on it, I will be at this May 10th meeting for the planning commission. It is both the area that I represent for NID as well as my personal home is affected. And I see this as one of the most important meetings of the year, or maybe of the decade. And so I will be there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Only thing I have is, so we just got a notice for the ag tour, Nevada County Ag Tour on May 17th.
Oh, yeah, I signed up for that.
And their hope is that that they're gonna have 3 buses, that we could have NID experts on each bus to talk while they're driving
Oh, interesting.
about water, because it's a water tour,
Mhm.
a water tour of Nevada County. So I plan to go.
I'm going. I've already purchased my ticket.
Not sure, I'm not sure. You're going to Placer.
I'm doing class.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, so I'll rope one of you in,
For sure.
great, or a staff person, it wouldn't matter.
We can coordinate offline.
Yes, okay.
Trevor?
So I'll be doing the Placer Ag Tour. It was great last year. Feel free to register. I think it's on Eventbrite. Come join us.
How are the blooms doing? Doing, I'm good.
Okay, and I don't really have anything to add other than flowers are finally blooming 2 weeks late after a very cold spring. Now we have a heat wave, which means
Yes.
I will be blasted.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
Are you accepting volunteers
Yes.
to come and help you?
sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Sign up, everybody. Okay, and I think that's it. So we will adjourn for the day, setting a record, I believe.
Whoa. Jennifer's getting happier and happier.
I don't know if this would be considered a record in my book, but.
Yeah, compared to what we're used to. Greg should be the judge of this,
Yes,
right?
sure.
Greg's seen the before and the after.
Yeah, that's right.
There's no lunch here today, so,
No lunch today, I
No
know.
lunch.
And no dinner.
and no dinner, so this is good.
Yeah.
Go Kings.
Okay, well, everybody have a great day.
We're almost done.
Almost.
Oh.
16 minutes.
Anybody in the NID family need firewood, get hold of me. PG&E came through, we're doing some down trees, but I mean, really,
Softwood, oak.
really quality
I
oak
can
wood,
have it.
Nice.
some of it dry. Let me know.
All right, on the record
You
now.
can also arrange delivery,
Okay.
Right.
it's free.
Oh, wow.
That's good.
Goodbye.